They toasted my disinheritance over candlelight, laughing like it was a punchline. My father called me undeserving. My mother smiled. My brother clapped. I set down my glass and walked out without a word. 48 hours later, the name more meant nothing. The email confirming my promotion arrived at 4:47 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself cry in my office with the door closed. Managing partner. Nora Moore, managing partner. Forensic Accounting Division. I read the line 3 times before I believed it. 12 years of unwinding other people's lies, of sitting across from executives who thought they'd been clever, of building spreadsheets that read like confessions. 12 years of eating lunch at my desk and taking cases nobody else wanted, and finally the letters on the door were going to include my name. I closed my laptop and looked at the small ceramic dish on the corner of my desk, the one that held my grandfather's fountain pen. Silver, engraved along the barrel with his initials, worn smooth from 4 decades of use. He had pressed it into my palm the summer I turned 12, curled my fingers around it, and said in that low, patient voice of his, "Numbers never lie, Nora. People do. Learn to read both." I had learned. God, I had learned. I was thinking about calling him, forgetting for a full second that he had been gone 8 years, when my phone buzzed on the desk. My mother's name lit up the screen, not a call. A text. From my mother, who did not text. "Nora, darling, your father and I would like you to join us for dinner Saturday at 7 at the Auberge. Private dining room. Preston and Celeste will be there. Please wear something appropriate. It's important." I read it twice. My mother had not asked me to a family dinner in nearly 2 years. Not since I had declined to attend Preston's 41st birthday because I had been on a plane back from a deposition in Denver, and my absence had somehow been interpreted as a declaration of war. She had stopped inviting me to things after that, in the polite, cutting way she did everything. I had told myself I didn't mind. I had told myself a lot of things, wear something appropriate. That was the phrase that stayed with me. As though I might otherwise show up in a paint-stained hoodie, as though I were still 15 and needed to be reminded that the Moores did not slouch, did not fidget, did not embarrass the family in public. I typed back a simple, "I'll be there," and set the phone face down on my desk. I should have felt suspicious. I should have felt the small, high hum in the back of my skull that I felt when a client's bookkeeper started explaining the same discrepancy 3 different ways. Instead, I felt tired and hopeful in a way I hadn't allowed myself to be in a long time. Because maybe, just maybe, my father had heard about the promotion. Maybe someone had mentioned it at the club. Maybe this was, at last, a family dinner where somebody said good job to me and meant it. I looked at the pen in its little dish. It caught the last of the afternoon light and threw a thin silver line across my wrist. I told myself he would have been proud today. And then I told myself, as I gathered my coat and my bag, pride from him was worth more than approval from all the rest of them combined. I just hadn't known yet that the two were about to be measured against each other on the same night. The auberge sat on the hill above the river, all cream stone and copper lamps, the kind of restaurant where the waiters knew what you meant when you said, the usual, even if you had never been there before. My father had held his 65th birthday there. My brother had proposed to Celeste there. It was the room where the Moore family went to be seen being a family. I arrived 4 minutes early in a charcoal wrap dress I had bought the month before for a professional headshot, low heels, my hair pulled back. I looked, in the mirror of the coat check, like a woman who had earned her own dry cleaning. My mother would probably still find something to correct. The maitre d' walked me back through the main room to the private dining room at the end of the hall. I heard my brother's laugh before I saw him, that big, brass laugh Preston had cultivated in college and never let go of. I heard my father's voice under it, and Celeste's soft, clipped one, and my mother saying, "Oh, stop it, stop it." The way she did when she was pretending to disapprove of a joke she had actually enjoyed. Then the door opened and they all looked up at once. There is a particular quality to the silence a family makes when they have been talking about you and you have walked in on the very end of it. It is not sharp. It is soft, quick, and slightly guilty, and it slides sideways into a smile before you can catch it. I caught it anyway. I have caught that kind of silence in more conference rooms than I can count. Nora! My father stood halfway, which was the most standing he ever did for me. You made it. Traffic was fine, I said, which nobody had asked about. Celeste was already reaching for my hand across the table, palm cool, rings warm. You look slim, she said. Have you been running again? You must tell me your secret. Celeste had a way of complimenting you that felt like being measured for a suit you weren't going to be allowed to buy. I took my seat. There was a place card at every setting, printed on cream stock. Mine said simply Nora, while my brother's said Mr. Preston Moore. My mother's said Mrs. Robert Moore. It was a small thing. It was not the smallest thing that would happen that night. The wine came, a Bordeaux I couldn't have named the price of, but could have guessed within $20. My father took a long, satisfied sip, and I watched the small, hard smile at the corner of his mouth, the one he got when he was about to say something he had rehearsed. So, he said, setting the glass down. How is, he waved his hand vaguely. The accounting. Forensic accounting, I said. It's going well, actually. I was just. Preston closed the Meridian deal, my mother interrupted, not unkindly, in the tone of a woman redirecting a small child who had begun to speak out of turn at a dinner party. Tell her, Preston. Preston told me, at length, about the Meridian deal, which I understood better than he did, because I had spent an afternoon 2 years ago quietly reviewing Meridian's financials for a client considering an acquisition, and had concluded, on the basis of an inventory line that made no arithmetic sense, that Meridian was carrying at least $6 million of overstated assets. But I did not say this. I nodded. I sipped my wine. I noticed that my father was not eating, and that Celeste kept touching the rim of her glass with one manicured finger, tap, 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 in a small private rhythm. That was the first time it hummed. The little high hum in the back of my skull. I reached for my purse under the table, an old habit, and my fingers found the shape of my grandfather's pen tucked into the inside pocket. I had put it there without thinking that morning, the way another woman might tuck in a lipstick. Numbers never lie, Nora. People do. I felt the smoothness of the silver under my thumb and made myself listen. And of course, Preston was saying, with Dad stepping back this year, it's really been on me to steer things, so. Stepping back, I said. There was a pause, a very small one. But I caught it the way I caught the silence when I walked in. Yes, darling, my mother said smoothly, your father is finally going to rest. We've been talking to Bernard about the estate and everything, tidying it all up. She smiled at me. Nothing you need to worry about. Celeste's finger tapped the glass. Tap, 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 and she said, in the same warm, bright voice she used for everything, "It's so lovely you were free tonight, Nora. I know how busy you are with that little townhouse of yours, all the maintenance. That must eat into your take-home." I looked at her. I had never told Celeste what I paid for my townhouse. I had never told any of them. I had bought it 4 years ago with my own money, and I had been careful about it in the way I was careful about everything, because my family had a habit of turning any piece of information about my life into a small stone they could throw later. She had said take home, not income, take home, as though she had seen a number. The pen was still in my hand. I felt it the way you feel a heartbeat in a wrist you've been holding for a long time. It's manageable, I said mildly, and turned to the waiter for another glass of water. But the hum had gone from the back of my skull to the base of my spine, and it did not go away for the rest of the appetizers. To understand what happened at the entree course, you have to understand what my family thought of me, and what they had thought of me for a very long time. I was the second child. Preston was the first, older by 4 years, and from the moment he could walk he was cast in the part he still played. The son, the heir, the shoulder our father would eventually clap and hand the keys to. My mother used to introduce him to her friends as our Preston, with the possessive pronoun doing a great deal of work. I was, from an early age, the other one, quieter, bookish, the child who preferred the company of my grandfather over the family Christmas parties. My grandfather ran the numbers side of the construction business, back when it was still my grandfather's business, and by the time I was 10, I was sitting on a stool next to his desk on Saturdays, learning to reconcile a bank statement. He was the only adult who spoke to me as though I might one day know something worth knowing. He was also the only one who noticed, out loud, that my father had begun steering the family business toward the ostentatious, high-risk work he preferred, the kind of jobs that made the newspaper, rather than the steady, unglamorous municipal contracts my grandfather had built the company on. My grandfather said, quietly, more than once, "Robert wants to be a big man. Big men fall the hardest." He said it to me the summer I turned 17, and he pressed his silver pen back into my hand after I signed the paperwork for my college fund. "You'll want this someday," he said. "You'll know when." He died the winter I turned 36, and I flew home for the funeral and stayed exactly 48 hours, because my mother had let the cousins run the seating chart and I had been placed at a table behind a pillar. My father used the eulogy to talk about himself. I remember thinking, sitting behind that pillar, that if my grandfather had heard it, he would have walked out. I did not walk out. I have always regretted that a little. After he died, I doubled down on the work. I made partner at 39. I bought the townhouse at 40. I got divorced at 41, from a decent man whose only real crime was that he had wanted a version of me my family had convinced me I was not allowed to be. I stopped going to Sunday brunches. I stopped explaining myself. I let them think what they wanted to think, because explaining had never once, in 44 years, made any of them see me differently. And in the years I was quietly gone, Celeste had moved in. Celeste had married Preston 9 years ago, a small-town beauty queen with a business degree and a plan. I had liked her, at first. She was warm to me in the way a saleswoman is warm to a customer, and I mistook it for sisterhood. It took me 2 Thanksgivings to notice that Celeste was always the person who mentioned, at the exact wrong moment, that Nora was still single, that Nora worked so hard she never called, that Nora had missed another birthday. She said these things with her head tilted, in a tone of concern, and my mother ate it up like cream. She had, I realized later, been building a case against me for years. Slowly, patiently. The way I built cases against embezzlers. A comment here. A raised eyebrow there. A small kind lie at Easter that made me sound cold. She had figured out, before I had, that if she was going to run the family, and she was going to run the family, I was the only person in it clever enough to notice. So she had made me an outsider, one polite dinner at a time. I looked at her, that night at the auberge, tapping her glass. I looked at my brother, half listening to my father, already flushed from the wine. I looked at my father, who had cut into his lamb and was chewing slowly, with the deliberate satisfaction of a man about to make a speech. And I understood, 3 seconds before he opened his mouth, that I had not been invited to dinner to be told about the promotion. I had been invited to be told something else entirely. My father set his fork down. He touched the corner of his napkin to his mouth. He looked around the table at his wife, his son, his daughter-in-law, and finally, last of all, at me. "Nora," he said, "your mother and I have been talking, and we felt it was only fair to tell you in person." Under the table, my thumb moved once very slowly along the smooth silver barrel of my grandfather's pen. Numbers never lie, Nora. People do. I smiled at my father across the candlelight and waited to see what kind of man he was going to be. "We're cutting you from the inheritance," my father said. "You've never deserved it." He did not lower his voice. He did not lean in. He said it the way another man might announce a golf score, with a small, satisfied lift at the end, as though the sentence itself were a gift he was giving the table. For a beat, nobody spoke. And then my brother laughed. That big brass laugh of his, the one he had cultivated in college. My mother made a small, delighted sound, half a scoff, half a giggle, and pressed her napkin to her lips as though the moment were simply too much. Celeste laughed too, a bright silver laugh, the kind of laugh you rehearse in a mirror. Even the busboy who had been about to refill my water paused mid-step, sensed the temperature of the room, and retreated politely toward the wall. I sat very still. I felt, in the exact center of my chest, a strange and unexpected calm, not the frozen calm of shock. The other kind, the calm you feel when a long arithmetic problem finally resolves and the last number lines up with the first. The calm of a ledger balancing. I looked at my father. Then at my mother. Then, longest of all, at Celeste, whose eyes were very bright above the rim of her glass. "I see," I said. "Now, Nora." My mother reached for her wine, misreading my composure as the prelude to a tantrum she was ready to manage. "Don't be dramatic. Your father and I have thought about this a great deal. Preston has been carrying the family business for years. It's only right that the estate reflects the contribution." "Contribution," I said. "You made your choices," my father said. "You wanted to go off and be an accountant." He said the word the way another man might say dog groomer. "Fine, be an accountant, but don't expect to inherit what Preston has built." What Preston has built, I filed that phrase away. Preston, emboldened, leaned back in his chair and raised his glass toward me. "No hard feelings, sis, it's just business." "Of course," I said. Celeste tilted her head, that small concerned tilt of hers. "We just want everything to be clean, Nora. Bernard is finalizing the paperwork on Monday. Your father wanted you to hear it from him, not from a lawyer's letter. It's actually very generous." Bernard Halsey, the estate attorney my father had used for 30 years. I filed that away too. I looked at the four of them. My father, red-faced and pleased with himself. My mother already glancing at the dessert menu, the matter closed. My brother halfway to drunk, delighted. And Celeste watching me, only Celeste watching me. I picked up my wineglass. I took one slow sip. The Bordeaux was very good, and I noted with a distant private amusement that this was probably the last glass of very good wine my father would ever pay for on my behalf. I set the glass down. I folded my napkin and laid it beside my plate. I picked up my purse. "Thank you for dinner," I said. "Nora," my mother began, "don't be." "Thank you for dinner," I said again, in exactly the same tone, and I stood. I did not slam the chair. I did not make a speech. I simply walked in my low heels across the private dining room, past the maitre d', through the main room where nobody looked up, and out into the cool, damp air of the parking lot. I got into my car. I did not cry. I sat there for perhaps 90 seconds with my hands on the wheel, and I let myself feel, one at a time, each of the emotions that were queued up behind the calm. The humiliation, the old childhood grief, the small, sharp fury at my brother's laugh. And I let them pass through me the way I had learned to let numbers pass through me, one after another, until I could see the shape underneath. The shape was this. My father did not have the authority to disinherit me from what he thought he was disinheriting me from. My father did not know that. Celeste did not know that. Bernard Halsey, bless his aging heart, probably did not know that either, because Bernard had never actually read the trust instrument my grandfather had signed the year before he died. Bernard had only read the will my father had asked him to draft, and my father had assumed the two documents said the same thing. They did not say the same thing. I knew this because I was the only person in the family, apart from one other, who had actually read the trust. My grandfather had shown it to me the winter before he died, at his kitchen table, with a cup of black coffee going cold between us. He had told me, in that low, patient voice, that he had watched my father spend 20 years mistaking noise for substance, and he was not going to leave the real more money. The land, the municipal contract rights, the controlling interest in the holding company that owned the operating company Preston thought he ran, in the hands of a man who could not tell the difference between an asset and a compliment. He had put all of it into an irrevocable trust. The trustee with sole discretionary authority was his older sister. My aunt, Delia. I started the car, I drove home. I sat down at my kitchen table with a glass of water and my laptop, and I called the one person I had not called in 8 months, because 8 months ago she had told me, very gently, that she was not going anywhere and I should call her when I was ready. Aunt Delia picked up on the second ring. "Nora," she said, just that. Just my name in her dry, warm voice the way my grandfather used to say it. "He did it tonight," I said. "He told me at the restaurant." In front of Preston and Celeste. There was a long, quiet breath on the other end of the line. "Well," Aunt Delia said, "it's about time." Aunt Delia was 72 years old, lived alone in a stone cottage on 3 acres of orchard about an hour north of the city, and had been, for the last 8 years, the sole trustee of what she and I privately referred to as the actual money. The family did not know this. The family did not know this because Aunt Delia and my grandfather had, between them, made a series of quiet decisions in the last year of his life that had never been read aloud at any dinner table. I drove up to see her the next morning. Sunday. The road wound through orchards just starting to turn, and I felt, driving it, the peculiar lightness of a person who has finally stopped hoping for something and can therefore, finally, do something else. Delia met me at the door with coffee already poured. She had my grandfather's eyes and my grandfather's habit of getting to the point. "Show me the will," she said once we were sitting. I hadn't seen it yet, of course, but I had spent the drive up thinking about what it almost certainly said, and I sketched it out for her on a legal pad while she listened. Robert would leave the house, the vacation property, and the operating company shares to Preston. He would leave a portion of the liquid assets to my mother. He would leave, per his announcement, nothing to me. "And he thinks that's the estate," Delia said. "He thinks that's the estate." She almost smiled. He always did think small. She got up and walked over to the sideboard and unlocked the top drawer with a small brass key. She took out a folder. She set it in front of me. I opened it. The trust document was 43 pages long. I had read it once at her kitchen table 3 years ago when she had asked me carefully, formally, whether I would agree to serve as successor trustee upon her retirement. I had said yes. I had told no one. I read it again now, slowly, with a forensic accountant's attention. And what I saw, reading it in the light of everything my father had said the night before, was the whole architecture of what was about to happen. The trust held the land. The trust held the municipal contract rights, which threw off roughly $1.5 million a year in rental income and licensing fees, and which my brother's operating company had been paying to my father for years, believing they were paying my father. In fact, they had been paying the trust, and my father had been receiving a stipend from the trust at Aunt Delia's discretion. The trust held the controlling interest, 61%, in the holding company that owned the operating company. Preston did not run the operating company. Preston ran a subsidiary that had a management contract with the operating company, and that management contract came up for renewal every 3 years. It had come up for renewal, quietly, 4 months ago. Aunt Delia had extended it with my written concurrence for 6 months only. 6 months. It would expire in 8 weeks. I looked up at her. "He doesn't know," I said. "He has never known," Delia said. "Your grandfather did not trust him to know, and frankly, dear, neither did I. He'd have gone to that boy of yours, Preston, I mean, and Preston would have gone to that wife of his, and the whole thing would have been unraveled in a year. So we let him think what he wanted to think. And now he's disinheriting me from a will that controls approximately 11% of what the family actually has." "Approximately," she agreed. We sat for a long moment with the coffee cooling between us. "There's something else," I said, because Celeste's little tap on the wineglass and her take-home had been humming in me for 18 hours. "I need to look at Preston's books." Delia raised an eyebrow. "The subsidiary." "The subsidiary. If Celeste knew what my mortgage payment looks like, she's been paying somebody to know things. And if she's been paying somebody to know things about me, she's been paying somebody to know things in general. And if Preston has been running that subsidiary for 4 years and my father has been stepping back, then somebody has been steering it," Delia said. "Yes." She reached across the table and put her thin, veined hand over mine. "Do you have access to the operating company's books, Nora?" "As successor trustee designate, on written request to the current management for cause, yes." I paused. "I have never made the request." "Then I think," Delia said, "you should make it tomorrow morning." I made it Monday morning at 8:04 a.m. In a 2-line email from my professional account, CCing my firm's general counsel, citing the exact section of the trust instrument that gave Aunt Delia the right to inspect and me the right to inspect on her behalf. I sent it to Preston, to the operating company's CFO, and to Bernard Halsey, whose face, when he read it, I would have paid money to see. Preston called me at 8:22. I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 8:41. I let it go to voicemail. He called at 9:03, and this time I picked up because I wanted to hear his voice. Nora, he was not laughing now. What is this? What is this email? It's a lawful inspection request, Preston. You don't have the authority. I do, I said. Ask Bernard, ask him carefully. Ask him to read Section 14 of the 2016 Trust Instrument, and then ask him to explain to you who has actually been receiving the municipal licensing income for the last 8 years. Take your time. I'm in no rush. There was a silence on the line that was so long I could hear his breathing. What do you want? He said finally. I want the books, Preston, by end of day Wednesday. Complete general ledger. Every intercompany transfer. Every management fee. Every reimbursement to Celeste's consulting company for the last 3 years. Celeste doesn't. Preston, I said gently, please don't lie to me on a recorded line. I hung up. I sat at my desk with my grandfather's pen in my hand, and I turned it slowly between my fingers, and I thought about the sound of my brother's laugh across the candlelight, and I did not smile. But I was, in a very small and very private way, at peace. The books arrived on Wednesday at 4:52 p.m., 8 minutes before my deadline, in a compressed file so large it took my laptop a full minute to unpack it. By 8 o'clock that night, I had a headache and a legal pad covered in notes. By 11, I had a second legal pad. By 1 a.m., I had what I needed. Celeste's consulting company, a shell registered in her maiden name, at an address that turned out to be a mailbox at a shipping store 2 towns over, had been billing Preston's subsidiary for strategic advisory services at the rate of $22,000 a month for 3 years and 4 months. $880,000 on paper for advice that had no deliverables I could find, no contracts I could locate, and no board approval I could trace. That was the small piece. The larger piece was worse. Preston's subsidiary had been billing the operating company for management services at a rate that had crept, quietly, from 4% of gross revenue to just under 11% over the course of 4 years, without a corresponding amendment to the management contract. That was, on my math, roughly $2.1 million of overbilling. And the operating company, whose 61% shareholder was the trust, whose trustee was my aunt, had been paying it. Preston was not running the subsidiary. Celeste was running the subsidiary through Preston. And they had been quietly bleeding the operating company for the better part of half a decade, banking, I suspected, on the assumption that when my father died and the estate reorganized, they would own enough of what was left that the discrepancy could be papered over. They had not planned on the trust. They had not planned on me. I called Aunt Delia on Thursday morning. I walked her through it, line by line. She listened without interrupting, and when I was finished, she said, "How badly do you want this to hurt them, Nora?" I thought about it, really thought about it. I thought about my grandfather behind the pillar at his own funeral. I thought about Celeste's take-home. I thought about my father saying you've never deserved it in the same tone another man might use to order a steak. I don't want it to hurt them, I said. I want it to be accurate. Delia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your grandfather would be very proud of that answer." We set the meeting for the following Wednesday. Aunt Delia called Bernard Halsey personally, in her capacity as trustee, and asked him to schedule a family meeting in his conference room at 10 in the morning to discuss some concerns that have come to light regarding the operating company. She did not mention me. Bernard, who had known Delia longer than he had known my father, agreed at once. He then, I found out later, called my father in a mild panic and told him that Aunt Delia had asked for a family meeting. My father, who had not spoken to his sister in nearly a decade, assumed she was going to try to make peace before the estate was finalized. My father, characteristically, decided that he would use the meeting to inform her, in person, of his decisions. He arrived, I was told, in his best charcoal suit. The morning of the meeting, I woke up at 5. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table with my grandfather's pen and a plain manila folder in front of me. Inside the folder was a 14-page summary of what Celeste and Preston had done to the operating company, cross-referenced to the bank records, with the total dollar figures highlighted. Behind that was the trust instrument. Behind that was a single-page letter, signed by Aunt Delia and notarized the previous afternoon, terminating the management contract between Preston's subsidiary and the operating company, effective immediately upon delivery. I put the folder in my bag. I put the pen in the inside pocket of my purse, where it had written all through the dinner at the auberge. Numbers never lie, Nora. People do. I looked at myself in the hall mirror as I put on my coat. I was not the woman who had walked into that restaurant 3.5 weeks ago. I was not, entirely, the woman I had been that morning either. I was, for the first time in a very long time, exactly the woman my grandfather had always thought I would become. I drove downtown. I parked in the visitor's lot outside Bernard Halsey's building. I sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel, the way I had sat in the parking lot at the auberge, and I felt the same private calm settle into me. Then I got out, walked into the lobby, and rode the elevator to the 14th floor. Bernard's conference room smelled of coffee and old paper. My father was already seated at the head of the table when I walked in, and the look on his face when he saw me was worth, on its own, every dinner behind every pillar I had ever endured. "What is she doing here?" "Robert," Aunt Delia said from the chair beside Bernard, "sit down." My mother, on my father's right, went very still. Preston, across from her, had the pale, sweating look of a man who had spent the previous night lying awake. Celeste sat beside him in a cream suit, her hands folded, her chin lifted, ready. I took the seat at the opposite end of the table from my father. I set the manila folder in front of me. I did not open it yet. Bernard cleared his throat. "Delia has asked for this meeting in her capacity as trustee of the 2016 Moore Family Trust. Robert, he paused, and I watched him choose his words. "I want to note for the record that I've had occasion, in the last several days, to reread that instrument. And I owe you an apology. I don't believe I fully appreciated its scope." My father's face began, slowly, to change. "Its scope," he repeated. "Robert," Aunt Delia said gently, "Father put the land in the trust, and the licensing rights, and the controlling interest in the holding company. In 2016. You signed the acknowledgement. I don't think you read it." The room was quiet. My father looked at Bernard. Bernard, to his credit, did not look away. "That's not," my father's voice cracked slightly. "That's the estate is. The estate is your house, your vacation property, your personal accounts, and the minority shares," Delia said. "It always has been. You've been drawing a stipend from the trust for 8 years. You just called it a distribution." I watched my mother's hand find my father's on the table, and for the first time in my life, I felt something like pity for her, because I saw the exact moment she understood that the story she had been telling her friends about the Moore family fortune had been, for 8 years, someone else's story. "That's not possible," my father said, but he said it quietly. He said it the way a man says something he already knows is true. I opened the folder. "There's a second matter," I said. Every head at the table turned. I did not raise my voice. I laid the 14-page summary in front of Bernard. I laid a second copy in front of Aunt Delia. I laid a third copy, and this was the one I had thought about, the night before, for a long time, in front of my mother, not my father. "Preston's subsidiary," I said, "has overbilled the operating company by approximately $2.1 million over the last 4 years, through unauthorized adjustments to the management fee. Separately, the subsidiary has paid approximately $880,000 to a consulting company registered to Celeste, under her maiden name, at a mailbox address, for services with no documentation. The bank records are behind tab 3. The intercompany transfers are behind tab 4. Celeste's chin came down half an inch. "That's a lie," she said brightly. "That's Preston, tell them." "Celeste," Preston said. It was the smallest word he had said all morning. "Preston, tell them she's making it up, she's always." "Celeste." She turned to look at him. And I watched, across the table, the exact moment my brother stopped being her husband and started being a man who could count. My father was staring at the summary in front of him, which he had not been given but which he could read upside down. His mouth was slightly open. "Preston," he said. "Preston, is this true?" Preston did not answer. He did not have to. I slid one more piece of paper across the table to Aunt Delia. She read it, signed it below her earlier signature, and passed it to Bernard. "That's a termination of the management contract between the subsidiary and the operating company," I said. "Effective on delivery. Delivery has been made. Bernard will file it this afternoon." "You can't," Celeste began. "Celeste," Aunt Delia said, and her voice was not unkind, "please stop talking." Celeste stopped talking. My father looked at last down the length of the table at me, not with fury. Not with the small, hard smile he had worn at the auberge. He looked at me the way a man looks at a room he thought he owned and has just realized he was only ever a guest in. "Nora," he said, "you did this in 3 weeks." "No, Dad," I said. "You did this over 40 years. I only wrote it down." I closed the folder. I stood up. And this time, when I walked out of the room, my brother stood up too, quietly, and did not follow Celeste when she rose to leave. The story of what happened to the Moore family after that Wednesday morning is, in its bones, a very simple one. Celeste filed for divorce within a month, which surprised nobody except perhaps herself. She had been operating on the assumption that Preston, humiliated, would cling. Preston, humiliated, did the opposite. He hired his own forensic accountant, not me, at his own insistence and with my full approval, and the accountant found, among other things, that Celeste had been quietly moving money out of the consulting shell for 18 months, in preparation for exactly the kind of exit she was now attempting. The divorce became, very quickly, a criminal referral. The state's attorney's office opened a file. Celeste's face appeared, briefly and unflatteringly, in the business section of the local paper. She left the state before the year was out. I have not heard her name spoken in my mother's house since. Preston repaid the operating company in full over 18 months, out of the sale of the house he and Celeste had built, and the surrender of most of what he had accumulated in his own name. It was not enough to cover everything. Aunt Delia, in her capacity as trustee, forgave the balance, on the condition that Preston step down from the subsidiary entirely and take a salaried position, a real one with a real job description, under a new operating manager she and I selected together. He accepted. He has, in the 2 years since, become a quieter man. He calls me on Sundays. We are, slowly, learning to have a conversation that is not about the family. My father did not lose his house. He did not lose his cars. He kept, exactly, what he had actually earned, which was the portion of the estate my grandfather had left him outright, and which turned out to be considerably less than he had been telling his friends at the club for 30 years. The stipend from the trust ended the month of the meeting. The club membership went the following spring. My mother, to my genuine surprise, adjusted. She sold the vacation house herself without being asked and paid off what needed paying off, and last Christmas she called me on the phone and said in a very small voice, "I don't know how to say this to you, Nora, but I would like to try." I said she could try. We are trying. My father and I have not yet had that conversation. I don't know that we ever will. He is a man who was told, at 68, that most of what he thought was his had never been his, and I don't think he has any language for what to do with that. When I see him at family gatherings, the small ones now, the quiet ones, he nods to me. I nod back. It is, for now, what we have. Aunt Delia retired as trustee last spring on her 74th birthday, and I took over. The land is still the land. The licensing income still comes in. The operating company, under new management, had its best year in a decade. My grandfather's silver pen sits in a small ceramic dish on the corner of my desk at work, and I used it on the morning I signed the trustee acceptance for the first signature. I still live in the townhouse. I still eat lunch at my desk more often than I should. I made managing partner, in case you were wondering, and the letters on the door do, in fact, include my name. Sometimes, late in the evening, when the office is quiet and the city outside my window is doing its long, slow blue fade toward night, I sit at my desk with a cup of tea and I turn my grandfather's pen slowly between my fingers, and I think about the Bordeaux at the auberge. I think about the sound of my brother's laugh. I think about the exact tilt of Celeste's head as she asked me about my little townhouse. And I think, mostly, about the thing my grandfather said to me at his kitchen table the winter before he died, which I have never told anyone, not even Aunt Delia. He said, "The people who underestimate you, Nora, are giving you a gift. Don't waste it on being angry. Spend it on being ready." I was ready. That, in the end, is the whole story.